Cool. We are live. Thanks for joining us, everyone in the network. I'm really, really excited about this hangout, and I was telling the folks that we were meeting with earlier that I'm really excited, and I feel like I've had to really dial things back a lot and try to sound as like unenthusiastic as possible to try to like slow myself down because I'm so excited. Um, I thought we could do a quick little go around um, and introduce ourselves and say where we're from. And I thought we could also get some other folks on the Hangout as well. So I know we've been having a little bit of audio problems in the spirit of a true Hangout on air. So I thought we could go around and introduce ourselves and say hi and where we're from. Um, and I guess Mo, would you want to start? And then Hillary, and then Andrea.
Hi, I'm Mo. I'm a studio coordinator. That's what we call our site here. Anything Libraries in Colorado.
Hey everybody, I'm Hillary Kolos, and I am coming at you from DreamYard in the Bronx, and I'm the Director of Digital Learning here, and we were one of the early adopters.
And I know that Andrea is having some audio problems, but Andrea Ellis is here, the Digital Youth Engagement Manager at the Kansas City Public Library. And Ryan is also on this call, but he is also without audio right now. So what we might do is just have the two of you guys put comments on the YouTube page, on the actual Hangout page, and I'll just like shoot you guys a link to that as we start going. Anyway, yeah, I'm really excited about this, and I don't know if you guys realize this, but today's a really big day because it's this hangout. It's also National Poem in Your Pocket Day, and it's also Walpurgisnacht. So I don't know if you guys are either carrying a poem in your pocket or you're lighting a bonfire tonight to drive away witches, but it's a really big day. And I thought we could get started by talking about this meeting that we had earlier this month in Berkeley, which is so crazy to think that that was just like a few weeks ago. And I guess it's kind of a nice reminder to think, oh, time can pass really slow sometimes. It feels like forever ago. But we got together in Berkeley. There were about 11 of us, and we started the beginning of what is going to be a lot of really wonderful, deep conversations and questions around what our future is going to be like as the YOUmedia Learning Labs network. So the way that I approached this group of folks, and I can just name them because not all of them are on this hangout. So Adrian Strock from Nashville, Ryan Hill from Art Lab Plus, Hillary is here, Mo is here, Brandon Clevens, BK from Philadelphia, Marcus Lumpkin from Umedia Chicago, Andrea Ellis, of course, and then Corey Twiggs from Aztec, me, Elise, and Christina Cantrell. Um, so we all got together and started asking ourselves these questions like, all right, now that these this initial stage of getting our sites up and running is over, what is next for us? So there are these 29 sites, 29 and more sites that are growing all over the nation. We're all in really different spaces, from science museums to community centers to libraries. So we all look very different. We might operate differently, have different staffing models, but nevertheless, we have these specific elements that we all share in common, right? So if we want to keep on expanding the network as we take on new sites like YOUmedia Hartford, YOUmedia Springfield in Ohio, that's opening up. If we want to expand, what is the best way to do that? And how can we articulate those common things that unite all of us so that we can invite these people, and as we're bringing on more people, they get the same sort of introductions that we all got. So there are different words to describe what those standards might be, whether it's standards, I would like to say standards with a lowercase s, hallmarks, our core beliefs, but articulating what those are. So that's why we got together, is to start that conversation. And like I keep on saying, it's the beginning of many conversations, and I'm really looking forward to articulating this with the entire community at large. So I'm going to do a screen share, and I think that we'll walk through the slideshow presentation. So this slideshow presentation, it's also in the Community of Practice site. It's linked on the YouTube page that you're probably watching this on now. And even if you're watching the archive version of this, you can still look at it and comment on it. It's totally commentable. So we encourage you to do that. So I'm going to switch to that. And who's taking the first section? Hillary, you're going to take the first section, right? So maybe you should read through it, and then I will invite more people to jump on if they want to engage in the conversation. Does that sound good? Okay.
Sounds good.
I will move over there.
Great. So yeah, I think we're just going to present on the different parts, and we did think that we needed sort of some context if we were going to make a document. So that is why we kind of created this first paragraph that is slide 1, that, or it's called slide 1, but I think it's slide 4 if you're following along, and K-Fi will be bringing it up. But generally, I don't love reading slides to people, but we thought it was necessary here because you may not have had a chance to look at this yet. So I'm just going to read through the whole slide and then add a couple comments, and we'll open it up, as I said. So the YOUmedia Learning Labs Network is an open community of creative, transformative spaces that aim to put connected learning into action by supporting the full diversity of young people in their service area. With a commitment to equity and digital inclusion, YOUmedia Learning Labs are expanding opportunity for youth to engage with digital media and creative technology. YOUmedia Learning Labs are primarily known by a small set of distinguishing features, which we call their hallmarks, and are characterized by particular ways of working. The initial 29 YOUmedia Learning Lab sites were built primarily in public libraries and museums and had the goal of establishing new ways of participating and engaging with these important learning institutions. However, YOUmedia Learning Labs have already been created in community organizations and school spaces and can exist in any generally accessible space or institution. In this document, we introduce these hallmarks and ways of working, accompanied by a set of indicators that can be used by staff to reflect on their work and assess their development as a YOUmedia Learning Lab. This document describes the key features and indicators of the YOUmedia Learning Labs model. So that's a lot, and I know we're going to open it up for comments, so I'm just going to say in the first part, I just underlined a couple keywords to think about and see if we agree on. This is really just setting the stage for why we have hallmarks and ways of working and indicators, but just that it's an open community, that we're seeking diversity of young people, that it's really based on digital media and creative technology. And I thought that was really interesting because it leaves it open for all content areas. So we were talking about, like, oh, there's science museums, and we're concerned about literacy, and we're doing art. All those things are possible, I think, in the way we wrote it, but I'd love to hear people's feedback. And also just in the second paragraph, the opportunity opens to broadening our network. We talked about that a lot over the weekend, and K-Fi, I think that's what gets me excited, like you're excited. It's just thinking about like all the different kinds of places that could be joining this network. And Dream Yards are always been a little different because we're a community center and not a library or museum, but we've learned so much from other people. But we'd also love to like have other community centers in the space and teach, you know, what we know and then learn from them. And thinking about this in schools more is so exciting. So just wanted to highlight those things that I think are really working well in the paragraph, but I'd love to hear what other people think about what's missing or what doesn't make sense.
Sure. I guess a couple of things that I noticed that had come up were the first question about, like, I believe that actually Marika might have brought this up, and Marika's probably going to be joining us, or we're hoping that she'll join us later on in this conversation. And I should also say that I just posted the Hangout link to the YouTube page. So if anyone is there watching right now and wants to jump in and be part of this conversation, that would be great. We really welcome you to join in now. But I think her question was that she expressed concern that that this document really be a reflection of the entire network and not just like a few select sites. And I think she had a little bit of confusion over it being called the YOUmedia Learning Labs Network. And I guess I think that does raise a lot of really interesting questions about like what we call ourselves and what we define as ourselves. And I don't know if you guys had any thoughts on that or something that you wanted to bring up about that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if anyone else is saying anything, but it's funny being an early adopter. It was funny when the Learning Labs name came up because I felt like the same way then. Like, oh, are we not doing Umedia anymore? Like, is this something broader? Is it something different? So I just wanted to like echo how naming things is really important and that we all get on the same page about it. So I don't really have an answer to it, like it should be one or the other, but if we can at least kind of all understand why the names were chosen to in the beginning, which may have, maybe could be written up at a later date or something, but that we understand that this is sort of the full range from Umedia Chicago all the way through whoever's joining us now, just starting. But how can do we need to add something in there that explains that or something like that might be helpful.
Yeah, and I think another point that it also brings up is, well, if you care about the name, then you're really going to care about the hallmarks that are underneath this name. You know, it's like if you care about what we're called, then we should really be working together to define who we are, and then we can keep on talking about other elements. Hi, folks.
Hey.
So do you want to introduce yourselves really quickly?
We're abruptly joining the conversation. We've been
thank
following
you.
along as well, but and we sort of heard the question about like Umedia and the Learning Lab, the Umedia title on the Learning Lab. But as for introductions, I'm Marcus Lumpkin, as you mentioned earlier, from Chicago.
I'm Julie Kozlowski. I'm also from Chicago.
And Taylor Bayless, Chicago.
Sure. Did you guys want to say something about any responses you had to that question?
Well, we did have a conversation about the title in the conversation and how it could be seen as sort of restrictive, and there are a lot of things in the document that that go towards really refining the definition of what it means to be a member of the Learning Lab naturally. But I don't have a lot of definite things to say about like taking out Umedia versus putting it in. I kind of think it's innocuous, in a lot of ways. I do believe in some ways it can, it can make it can be perceived as like a limiting, title because the brand is so strong. I believe that the recognition of the Umedia brand sort of stands, on its own, and that may make using the term kind of mean more than we in the network believe it does. So, and I don't know if that kind of makes a lot of sense, but I think the brand makes the term a little more stronger than we may think it does.
Yeah, and the other thing too that I would just like to say is, when we ask questions like this, I want questions to raise more questions. I'm not looking for anyone to have answers, and I think that any kind of conversation that's brought on by this is always going to be good. And as someone had mentioned earlier before in the conversation, this is the beginning of a really deep reflective process, and that's going to really take a lot of time. And I think we're going to see a lot of things surface as the summer goes on and as we really drill down to find and identify what these things might be. So I guess let's go on to like the next section, like talking about what we saw as some of the hallmarks and the indicators. And Mo, do you want to take that and I'll screen share?
So we came up with these hallmarks that really were common throughout all of our different sites that ranged from actual learning organizations to museums to libraries. And what we came up with is that because they come in many shapes and sizes, they did have these similarities. The first one is guide teens to develop a sense of agency, increase their skills in leadership, provide dedicated mentors, including teaching artists or experts in fields of interest to young people, strive for a balance of hanging out, messing around, and geeking out, are active spaces centered around youth production guided by a core philosophy that youth are best engaged when they are following their passions, collaborating with others, and being makers and doers, not passive consumers. Offer consistent and dedicated environments for learning, provide access to tools and technology that support creativity and innovation, help young people develop skills that are relevant to them and that have value in the real world. And kind of looking at this, I, I personally really like these hallmarks because they're very broad in what they cover, and so regardless of the staffing model or your organization, you can include all of these hallmarks to help push forward your space, and they're not inclusive, so um, it's very much just a template that you could use to help guide the way that your space will look so that it's personal and relevant to the community that you serve.
Great, thanks. So I know that there was some conversation that we had amongst ourselves about some of these hallmarks, and I think Hillary, you specifically brought up in the discussion board on the Community of Practice site hallmark number 3, where we talked about Homago. I was wondering if you could share any ideas that you had about that or any thoughts that you had about that.
Yeah, I think, so more broadly, one thing I was thinking while Mo was reading them, which I think is good to share with the whole group, is that we were kind of assuming all sites had, I think Elise brought this up in the meeting, like, this is not the only, like, hallmarks of what we do. We're also kind of assuming, like, good youth development practices in addition. So we put up a lot of things and posters on the wall that were just like, you know, supportive adults and caring environment and stuff like that. And that's stuff that isn't really in the hallmarks, but it's stuff I think we're assuming, and that these are things that make good youth development, like YOUmedia E, like we say. So that was just, I don't know, for some reason it was important for me to remember that these are sort of like the essence of what YOUmedia is in a context of good youth development work that we all do. But for number 3, I think that came out of a lot of discussions that I've been having with other people in the network about drop-in or not drop-in, sustained programming versus not sustained programming. Is it just about having low barriers to entry or not? And I think this is, the number 3 is where we ended up with all those questions, which I think are still all very open and we can discuss them, was trying to have some kind of balance of program structure and access that included time to hang out, time to mess around, and time to geek out. So I'd really love, as we go on in our conversations, to talk more about that. Like, so where does drop-in fit in that? And does the site have to be drop-in to be a YOUmedia site? If you're only geeking out, are you really doing YOUmedia? You know, that kind of stuff. And we all have sort of different approaches. So that's where I think that came out of.
Right, I think that's really great, and kind of echoing what you're saying too, I'm glad that you brought up that positive youth development is just a given, supportive staff is just a given. We were really trying to articulate, well, okay, if we have this standard now, like, you know, we all are on the same level in terms of that, but what's going to make us different from other networks? And this is kind of a side note, but one thing that I got pretty excited about in terms of starting the foundations or the standards for this network is that, you know, this is ours and we really get to build this up in the way that we see it in terms of like on the floor practice and if you're an administrator, like what works best for you. So this is a really exciting time to be part of this whole group because we get to build it in the way that works best for us. Like we started this meeting by doing just like a writing exercise about all the networks that we're part of, from, you know, Instagram to Tumblr to in-person networks, and thinking about the things that we got out of those networks and why we valued being part of those networks. So I'm really interested in making this network be a place that everyone and all of the practitioners, all the administrators that are part of the executive staff that's part of this network, can really use it as a thing that makes their practice better, or the way that they work better. Yeah, so thinking about like what makes us different from other networks too. So I guess that's like a bit different than talking about like, do you do Hamago, do you not do Hamago? Are you more drop-in? Is it more like low barrier to entry? Like, I guess we wanted to make sure that these hallmarks, it wasn't just like, do you meet these 10 things? If you don't, you're out. If you do, you're in. And to have it be more of like a pretty fluid thing.
Yeah, K5, we sort of had a lot to say about that during a meeting yesterday. The number 3, it's striving for a balance of hanging out, messing around, and geeking out. We discussed that sort of in a lot of detail, because it's sort of important to us to understand how that fits into defining us, how, you know, the hanging out, the working out the balance in our space, how it actually defines us. And, you know, based on the fact that we've been around long enough to sort of see these 3 aspects in practice, and we're lucky to have sort of matured and experience on how these things work out in a space. So and during our conversation, you know, we stuck on the point of trying to figure out how hanging out actually translates into the space, and what does it mean to actually include all 3 of those activities and processes in your space. Like, we really thought that having social time and, including sort of like a more organic connection for teens in your space, like allowing them to just like be there, was really important to us, because that actually, evolves into higher level of activities in the space. I believe we've seen that sort of happen in our space often. So we really thought about like how it's kind of easy to cut out the hangout part, because it doesn't seem like it doesn't naturally seem like a very complex component. It's just, kids just sitting in your space or whatever. But really, in practice, it is kind of important. And so when we think about spaces that, other spaces that don't necessarily have the capacity to do a lot of hanging out, it challenges us to think about, well, what does it mean if there isn't a capacity for a space, if it's an online space, or if it's, a space that doesn't have, once again, doesn't have the capacity to do a lot of hanging out. Like, what does it mean for them to sort of adhere to this standard or whatever, or the desire of hanging out. I don't know if you guys understand that.
Yeah, well, and we talked about it in the context of, like we were talking specifically about DreamYard, because you have these awesome programs, but we were wondering about, maybe there's a spot within those programs where you are hanging out. There's certainly like a social aspect to your programming where teens are, conversing, and that's a sort of hangout space, but it's not separated from your entire program.
Yeah, we were also talking about hangout being part of program design. It may not necessarily be something that's about the activity that happens in the space. It may be more about like how you build your curriculum, including Hamago in that curriculum. Because I think like I've talked to people at Art Lab who try to design Hamago within their curriculum, and we have a particular mentor in one of our branches who really intentionally thinks about having hangout activities within workshops. So kind of bringing people in that may not have, like Marcus was saying, the capacity to have hangout space for kids in their after-school programs.
Yeah, I mean, it's just really interesting to me because it's that is, you can have it within a program, and then also it has to do with, like, the drop-in question is just a bigger level because it's about general access to your site and barriers to entry, right? So there's one conversation about Homago within each program and across your programs, and then there's just sort of like your site. And I think we still deal with it, now 3 years down the line, that because DreamYard, just in case people don't know, DreamYard is like a private nonprofit, so we have certain things that, like, you have to fill a registration form, and basically it's free to get in, but we don't really like have any programs set up for people to just like drop in and take a workshop or just drop in and use a computer. So that does bring up questions of access that I think are really important about who utilizes our space, and something that we can continue to think about. But we can definitely do the Homago across programs too. So it's sort of like multiple levels of access and program structure that I think is really rich. So it's, we can have a whole webinar on number 3, I think.
But this is great because it's like it's seeding these conversations, and this is exactly what we anticipated would happen and what will continue to happen. So I think that we should move on just with the slideshow, just so everyone gets walked through all the things that we were talking about. And again, I just want to encourage anyone who might be watching this webinar to join in using the Hangout link that's on the YouTube page. Does someone want to read through the ways of working section?
I think I offered to do it for Andrea, unless someone else really wants to. And Andrea and I worked on this a bit too, so I might have some thoughts. So this is after we've established the hallmarks, which are sort of like our core values or something, our standards with a little s. It's kind of like, how are we going to accomplish those? Like, what's the process that we go through to get it, or the approach? So our ways of working were, in order to achieve the hallmarks and values listed above, YOUmedia Learning Labs should practice the following ways of working with youth. An interdisciplinary approach, offer multiple points of entry for participation to address a range of youth interests. Design for equity and inclusion, remove barriers to participation to ensure that a diversity of youth are involved. Support youth development, encourage youth leadership in all aspects of programming. And then to foster these ways of working with youth, staff create flexible and adaptive programming and work together to engage in cycles of creation, feedback, and reflection, collaborate with youth to co-design programs youth find relevant, and support growth and development of skills among staff. So I won't say too much, but just kind of noting that the first part is really about working directly with youth, and then we made a second part about how we work with our staff, like the adults in our space. We thought it was important, even though there was overlap and similarity between the two, we thought that it's important to think at both levels about your approach. Like, how do you teach, and then how do you also support your staff?
Great. Does anyone have anything that they want to say about those things? Or then we can just move on to the indicators of health and wellness, and then just open it up to a more general conversation and some questions.
Yeah, Kayla, I definitely want to highlight the fact that we really did think a lot, even in our conversations, in our individual space. We thought a lot about the ways that we are staff members, we are, kind of practitioners and, administrators and stuff like that. And it's easy for us to sort of consider our, our services and programs as like a staff to team sort of thing, and just consider it in that way. But I think I like the fact that we kind of took time to think about like the road, to us, like teens, how teens, consider us, and considering that and using that as a sort of guideline to sort of think about the way we work, because it matters, the way that our youth consider our practices, like it matters, and that actually defines us in some ways more than our the way that we sort of model and teach and stuff like that. It matters what they think about it in this conversation, and maybe that's something that might be more relevant when we get to the next sort of step. But I like considering like how what teens would think about these hallmarks and our methods and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think with the original Learning Labs planning grant, so much was focused around youth participation and youth voice and youth participatory design, and having that be a really central element. So I'm really glad we got around to like making sure that it was highlighted as one of these potential things. Does someone else want to read indicators of health and wellness? I saw a finger point at Julie.
Because during the meeting, Ryan and BK and myself, others who participated, we talked about indicators of health and wellness, and we really liked the term health and wellness to describe the points that we want to model in our spaces, and almost the outcomes that we would expect to happen if a space is practicing and using the hallmarks, and then going through the ways of working. If a space is modeling these sort of methods and such, then we say to ourselves we expect that there should be indicators and that naturally follow. And so I'll just read. They're broken down as sort of 4 categories, of course, like with consideration to youth participation, that's an indicator, and programming, institutional support, staff models, and engagement with the network. So under these are all points that we felt that would be exemplified if and are exemplified in a lot of spaces already. The points that we consider kind of points of success, things that we have seen in our space that we like, and we consider them results of best practices. So I'll read through. Youth participation: participants recruited in a way that broadly represents the area's community. Recruitment suggests that the site has the intent of providing opportunities for underserved youth. Data collection on youth participants, and that's to determine where they're coming from and how often they come, how they participate. And I want to note under this point that we did talk about using that data to directly affect, and actually in my comment I kind of make that point, making sure that we use data not just collected arbitrarily just for like fun research stuff, but really use it to change the programming based on what our patrons and participants and the youth that we serve, what they are thinking and doing. And it kind of says that under programming too, which is the next section. So under programming it says curriculum based on and responding to the interest of youth participants, youth provided with supportive mentorship and opportunities to follow their interests and discover their own leadership. Youth offered a palette of technological choices that enabled them to foster a practice of critical thinking that informs those choices. So that's under program. These are the things that we see should happen, and honestly are happening in our spaces that we like. These are characteristics that we think have been created based on the things that we've talked about, the hallmarks and such. So under institutional support, the site's institution shows compelling, visible, tangible support of the site. This was sort of a big one for us because we thought that it should be evident if a site is doing things right and really working to serve the youth in the way that we've mentioned before, then there should naturally be institutional support. And once again, in our site, we're kind of lucky to have like great administration. I gotta give a thumbs up to like Brian Bannon and all of our commissioner and stuff like that. But we kind of enjoy institutional support because the very tangible results of the space. Teams are coming in. People are seeing what we do. Our patrons are looking for more of the same services that we offer. So we said during our meeting that these are things that should naturally happen. Staff models, staff provided with opportunities for professional learning, a mentor type position for direct youth engagement. These are the points of the staff models. And then under engagement with the network, the site actively and openly shares knowledge and resources that contribute to the YOUmedia community of practice. So once again, we imagine if you do sort of work through these hallmarks and your space is practicing these ways of working, then you kind of naturally will be connected to the network and, offering your advice and, getting fed through the connections that you make. And these are things that we all, have done. Literally, as we're in the meeting with Ryan from Art Lab, yes, I'm asking him about programming advice, and so I think it's a very a kind of practical example of the things that that we kind of naturally do and naturally follow based on the things that we do in our space, the following these hallmarks. Hopefully I didn't talk too long.
No, that's great. Thanks for walking through all of those points. So I guess I wanted to kind of frame this whole thing into a little bit of a timeline and kind of what's next and what do we do next over the next 6 months, the next 8 months, the next 2 years. So we met earlier this month. We're going to be meeting again at right before DML in June. So we really want to use this time now to communicate with all of the network members about what you guys think about it, get your feedback, and then when we meet in DML, at DML we're going to be refining all of the things that we picked up from you and the questions that you raised and refining this list further. After DML, we'll bounce that back out to the community of practice through the COP and also through email to everybody. And then we're going to be meeting again for a final time in August to really refine this list. And we imagine it would be something like a list that would be very much like this document, but not in slideshow format. It would be like a paragraph at the top, a bunch of bulleted points, and then maybe a summarizing paragraph. But that would eventually go probably sometime in August or September on youmedia.org, on our community of practice site, as really defining, okay, this is who we are. And then we'd be moving on to the next steps, whether that would be onboarding new sites, expanding, reassessing ourselves, and looking inwardly and just making sure that we are all on the same page about this. So that's what I see the next 6 to 8 months looking like. I guess, and now I kind of want to bring back to this, bring it back to what we've been talking about. And I guess I just wanted to open it up for any questions that people might have or any concerns or things that other folks wanted to talk about. For example, one thing that a question that came up that I thought was a pretty interesting question was, what's missing from this document? Do you think that there's anything that should be here that isn't in here? And one thing that, I'm not sure who brought this up, but a few people voiced concern over this. Should there be some sort of mention of social justice or social engagement within this document? Is that something that we want to define ourselves around? And I think this came out of maybe it was a community of practice conversation about, my site. I'm just saying that, as an example, we don't really talk about social justice issues, and then there might be another site that really does. Is that something that we as the Umedia Network want to work on, or that we want to have as part of one of our core principles, is to be able to engage with youth? If we look at some of the earlier parts in the document that kind of talk about equity and access. So I guess I wanted to throw that out to you folks and see what you thought about it. I'm seeing a little bit of hesitation. Hillary, thanks.
Yeah, and we've had like breakout groups before at some of the Learning Lab retreats, which I thought were really interesting. And I think so DreamYard is very, very invested in, so like bias, we're very invested in social justice, and I would love for it to be a part of the network. But I know we have had conversations before with organizations where it's not necessarily part of their mission, or they don't necessarily see the kids interested in it on the surface. So we ask questions about like, oh, do we bring it up? Is it really interest driven if they're not asking questions? Social justice is a particular name too that other people might say civic engagement, and they all kind of mean different things and different approaches. So I think if we wanted something like that, we would all have to kind of agree on what we're calling it, and if we even all agree. And I think some people can see that as a content area too. So it's like, well, we focus on science, so we don't necessarily do art or social justice. So I think it's a question about whether or not social justice or civic engagement can be woven through everything that we teach, or if it in and of itself is sort of like a content area. Sounds bad, but like what you're making media about, or what you're making something creative about. So yeah, we have a particular interest in doing it, but I think not every organization necessarily does or is ready for that or wants to do it or has it a part of their mission. So I think it would be a good in-person conversation at some point to get a wider range of views on. Oh, sorry, and I'll just add, part of it is like access to the space, but then it's also how you approach what you're doing, right? So I think social justice is seen in the current document that we have in terms of like being really intentional about reaching a range of your community and making sure you're easily accessed by a range and you're actually actively recruiting. But then also once they're there, how do you approach things? So that's like a whole nother conversation, I think.
Great, thank you. I also think that we could use this Hallmark document as a way to learn and as a way for like me as a potential site to get better at the things that I want to get better at. Like say that I wanted to, like, like the data collection question and trying to reach as many youth in a city as possible. Not every site is going to be doing that perfectly. No site does that perfectly where they're able to access, like, where they're able to reach all of the kids who really would probably benefit from and use the space the best. So I see it really as like this is what we would like to be, and here's how we can help each other get better at the things that we want to do, like what Marcus was saying about when he asked Ryan about programming ideas, like using the network as a way to build ourselves up and make our sites better. Okay, I think that we should probably have another one of these conversations with more people. And I'm wondering if we want to do another format, and this is something that we can all talk about if we want to do a conference call or something else, but have another opportunity for folks. I mean, it's obviously completely optional for you to join in, but I would love to hear other people's voices and get their opinions or get their feedback. So just to reiterate again, please leave comments either on this document. We can start more conversation in the Community of Practice site. If you wanted to contact one person individually and have them bring your concerns to the next task force meeting, please do that. But the goal is to have everybody involved and everyone participating in one way or another. Otherwise, sound good? Any last words?
Yeah, I would just invite people to ask hard questions. I think that started to happen on the Community of Practice, and I think even though it was a small group that got this started, that we really want to be pushed and challenged, and we want your input. So don't feel like this is pretty set in stone and they don't really need my, like, I feel totally different, but I'm just going to let it go. Like, please throw stones at it and poke holes in it and make sure this really represents the network. Otherwise, the network's not going to grow, and people are just going to fall off because they don't agree with what we're saying, right? So this is truly a working document, and please, like, pick at it as much as you can because we have time to work on it.
Yeah, we 100% agree with Hillary on that. We really think it's very important for, like, for as many sites as possible to comment on, a document that potentially sort of describes what a YOUmedia or a learning lab space is. I really think, like, asking the hard questions is very important. We think it's very important. One of the hard questions that we put out there in our meeting yesterday was, when we looked over this document, it came up to ask ourselves, like, what cannot be omitted? What in this document really needs to stay sort of no matter what, versus, like, what things can be, like, vague and sort of, like, pushed aside a bit. We think the harder conversation to have is thinking about in all of these hallmarks and, like, best practices and things that we want to define our space to consider really what cannot leave. So we're hoping that a lot of people will sort of almost attack the document so we can get as much feedback as possible, because we're really we're really thinking about these, and a lot of these are points that happen in our space already and that are kind of driving us to consider our program, reconsider our programs daily. So.
Great. Anyone else? Are we good? I saw that there are actually a few things that came up in the YouTube conversation, but I am going to send out another invite to folks to join the Community of Practice site. If you haven't done that already, I'd encourage you to get all of your staff that are on the floor working with teens on the community site as well. So that will be one follow-up, and I'm looking forward to deepening and continuing this conversation. All right, have a great day, you guys.